so I'm excited that you've decided to join us today, and a special thank you to SylviaGlobal.com for our Front Row Conversations. And one of the things about Front Row Conversations is about authentic conversations that connects and supports emotional and spiritual wholeness for purposeful living, particularly as it relates to pastors' wives and ministry leaders. So today we're talking about marriage. Last week we talked about "And I'm Married to the Pastor." This week we were talking about marriage. It hurts, but I'm in it. So I am honored to have my friend, my sister girl, and also a minister of the gospel, Vicki Keys. And Vicki has done a lot of work. Her bio is posted on SylviaGlobal.com, but I want to highlight the ministry that she and her partner, Pastor Rodney Keys, has, which is Liberty and Life Ministries, a ministry around marriage and family. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Vicki.
Hello.
Hi. So, Vicki, as we talk about authentic conversations around marriage, and we realize that it is impacting marriages everywhere, let's jump right in and just get to the core of some of the issues around marriage. So what I want to do, I felt it was important. I've used the word several times, emotional and spiritual health, and I'm going to define that. One of the things that Dr. Itahari Ture from ITC states, whenever you're talking about terms and definitions, you need to define what you mean about that so we could have a clear understanding. And from that, we're going to talk about marriage, and we have some conversations, some questions, and just a dialogue this morning. Well, for emotional health, and I'm going to read this, for me, it means to be able to accept your own feelings, emotion, and authentic responses to events and situations in your life, which gives you the necessary emotional safety you need to become secure, stable, and relaxed. And for me personally, this allows you to discover and embrace your purpose, to be authentic in your relationships, and offer support to others who are in need of the community. That says a whole lot. And basically what I'm talking about is the ability to do the interior work, to know that God is present and is concerned about our emotions. And so also from spiritual health, I want to use a definition as well. Spiritual health is being in touch with your emotions and feelings and understanding that God does not ignore them, but wants to heal you in the areas that need healing. So that's the platform for Front Row Conversations, and that's even the platform today. So Vicki, tell our audience a little about you and your ministry, and then how, with your background being I'm going to say scientist, engineer, that you flowed into ministry, particularly ministry as it relates to family and marriages.
Okay, I am the president and co-founder of Liberty and Life Ministries, and what we're a come alongside ministry, and we come out and we support other ministries in the area, like you said, of marriage and family. Mm-hmm. Now, my background is, by degree, I have my bachelor's degree in biological sciences. I started out at Virginia Tech and finished my degree at Wright State University because my husband and I got married very young while we were in college. That speaks a lot to our experience and the stages of development we've come through together. So we're going to spend some time giving some good examples of, how we grow together and how marriage proceeds through different seasons. Also, I have my early emotional development certification through a ministry called World Discipleship Association. And what they have is a program called Restoring Your Heart Group. And it was through this that we'd already developed and launched Liberty and Life Ministries in 2007. We went through a traumatic loss of our son in 2008. And that's how I came into the ministry of Restoring Your Heart Group, which really just reinforced the concepts that we had already been teaching about marriage and family. And this principle, what we do at Liberty and Life Ministries is we come alongside of other ministries and we help people understand the common deceptions of life. And you'll find that, from marriage to marriage, stage to stage, and season to season, we all have come into marriage with some emotional areas that did not mature properly in our childhood, hurts and wounds, things from our past. We call it baggage. You know how some people call it baggage.
Wow.
And what it produces is this common term, we say drama. These areas are the issues that developed back then, but what happens is once we get at the altar together, we're perky, we're excited, we're going to get married, we got ready. We go through all these efforts, but we forget, or we haven't always been trained that we're going to build in now family patterns, things that we didn't like, hurts and things from our past, and this is what we deal with. So, and God is very concerned about this. He says, "Beloved, I wish above all things that thou mayest prosper and be in health, even as thy soul prospers." And I think what happens is a lot of times we do so well understanding what the Word of God says about our spiritual life, but not understanding how to apply those principles practically in the walking out of the day-to-day in the soul arena. And our spirit is the part of us that's created in God's image. It's perfect. It's just like God. So when we receive the Word of God in that area, there's no complications in understanding what the Word says. But where we have trouble is applying it in the day-to-day areas in our marriages where communication is concerned. Sometimes we have triggers that come up in our lives from hurts, shames, and offenses that either come from our past, and sometimes we create them inside of marriage. Sometimes we, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you a question. Go ahead.
Oh, yes.
You've said several things there, and I just want to kind of unpack some of the things that you've talked about. And let's go back, and you talked about when we say I do, and a lot of times, you get married, you're planning the wedding, you're doing all of those things, but when you're just as you're getting your, and I don't even know whether they use the term nowadays, trousseau, you're packing your bags.
Right. Let's
talk about some of the baggage. Can you name baggage? What do you mean by baggage that we bring into our marriages? And then later in the conversations, we're going to talk about how that impacts ministry. But what about some of the baggage that we bring into our marriage, and how does that help, hurt, or hinder the marriage?
Okay. Some of the baggage is from unmet needs. So when we're growing up, everybody needs to feel valued. We need to feel connected. We need to feel loved and appreciated. And if there were any voids in any of those areas, those can come along as baggage that create problems for other relationships that we have. Because sometimes we want our needs met that are voids for us that only the Savior can make in our lives. And we don't always know that. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know in those areas. Sometimes we have disappointments that happened in our past, and so we bring those disappointments along as a baggage in our marriage, and what happens is these areas start piling up. And I like to think of it like a stack of laundry, like you take off a dirty shirt or a dirty pair of jeans.
Right.
And the first pair that hit the ground, they're just on the foundation, and then the next shirt that piles up is just bills. And the next thing you know, you have this big mound of laundry that needs to be washed, and there's spots on them, and there's wrinkles in them, and so they have to be laundered, cleaned, and purified, go through the cleansing cycle, and which would be for us like a healing cycle. I'm making an analogy now between baggage and dirty laundry. And then once that healing cycle is done, it becomes fresh, we can iron it out, it becomes new, and the spots are out of it. Well, likewise,
Vicki, this is what I would say, and it would be interesting that you would say that, because I don't like doing laundry.
Okay. So, you gotta get your hands
as
dirty.
You were using this analogy about the jeans hitting the floor and all of that, what happens when it sounds so wonderful in terms of order and putting things in the washer and getting the spots out, but what happens, let's use that analogy of laundry. What happens if you don't like doing laundry? And when you don't like doing laundry, you have a pile up of dirty clothes that you have to do. So let's talk about that as it relates to if the baggage or coming into the marriage is like that, let's talk about what that means and how that impacts the whole concept of I'm married and I'm in it, but it hurts. Say more. Let's
Yeah.
talk about that.
And I think that's a great blend in because, all of us have an area in our human nature where we don't want to
Hmm.
change. I mean, it's
Right.
just hard to do it. And sometimes we're unwilling, sometimes we're willing with a little bit of regret. I mean, it's just all different stages of it. But I think all of us can relate to areas that we just don't want to change.
Right.
For example, let's say your mother did a particular thing, believed a certain particular thing, and then you have that voice right behind you. And so you don't think there's anything wrong with how you do something because mama always did it that way and grandma always did it that way.
Exactly.
And we bring this family pattern, this little voice behind us of, how we were raised up and things that happen in our home that we think are just practically fine. But at the same token, the other spouse had a different voice behind them. And they think that's perfectly fine too.
Right.
So if we get to this place where we're not willing to adjust ourselves, marriage has a lot of intentional work behind it that needs to be done. And
I
there's
know that.
yeah, and there's a lot of areas
Right.
where sometimes we have to recognize that maybe it's not a bad thing, but in order to be accommodating with our spouses, we do have to be willing to change some of the things that we learned growing up. And
Okay. Well, and that's a good break there because you said we have to be willing to change some of the things that we've learned from growing up. Now, how long have you and Pastor Keys been married?
we have been married 27 years.
Oh, my goodness, 27 years. Friends? Yes. You're not responding.
Yeah.
I asked, were you friends? Okay, now you know
Oh
this
yeah.
is
Oh
being
yes, we
recorded.
were. We were friends. We met in college. We were
I
at Virginia
know.
Tech, and he was studying there in engineering, and I was a biology
Right.
student, and I was struggling with calculus, and I met him as a math tutor,
Oh,
and so
my goodness.
so I think he did a little bit better than just tutoring. I think.
Okay, I see that. I was just messing with you.
Yeah.
So that leads because you talked about baggage, you talked about the things we bring into our marriage, and I really like that piece that you talked about the voices that we hear because that's a big piece. If you ever get a chance to check out some of the media on Gail Sylvia, just the whole conversation around voice, but you also brought it within context as it relates to the voices that we bring in our marriage relationship. So my question, and you can answer if you want to, is a personal question as it relates to marriage. Where there are times in your 26 years, you're a Christian, your husband and you are in ministry, that you said, can I just like not do this? Let's talk about that.
And we've been through a lot of seasons together. Because to get
Yes.
married that early, first of all, in college,
Mhm.
that's just a long, long process. First, we had to get to know each other.
Yes.
And speaking of voices, in my household, we make this joke. And I was like the Black Italian family. Everybody spoke at the same time. All the volumes of voices were loud.
Yes.
Everybody was engaged all the time. Well, Rodney's family and household, they were like the conservative British. And so no one spoke out of turn. There was a
Mhm.
lot of reverence for the king, and everything revolved around a different type of process. And
Mhm.
so, in terms of now bringing that into communication, talk about baggage or things that just cause
Right.
unfruitful conversation, and the tone that I would use or it definitely was tone or the intensity of the expression would, at first cause complications in our communication because, I'm speaking passionately, using my hands, and he's expecting conservative conversation and
Mm.
don't get ahead of me on that step. Let's go through it methodically from A to Z. And we had to learn how to, and that became frustrating. There were times I wanted to quit in that because it just seemed like we were talking two different languages, like from two
Mhm.
different planets. The old book, Venus and Mars. And so the way by which we communicated with one another, we had to learn how to become what we call naked and unashamed.
Oh, naked and unashamed. So
Yes.
that's a biblical term, and we talked about. You said several things there, the communication, what you're bringing, the voices that you heard, and say more of when you say naked and unashamed. Exactly what do you mean by that as it relates to marriage?
Okay, it means that, you have to give each other space to be who you are. I think we
Mm-hmm.
were so busy at first in our young marriage trying to make each other into who we wanted it to be or how our households were. And you could understand that that would cause some conflict because I'm not going to be who grew up in his house. He's not going to be who grew up in my house. So we had to become something called blend dependent and not independent or
Oh,
codependent.
okay.
And I
Say
think we
that again, Vicki. Say
okay,
that word again.
we had to become, this is our word, blend dependent. In other
Okay.
words, I had to accept that he was from a very conservative, quiet family, and
Okay.
I had to adjust myself some to that. Now, I still am working on that because I still get real passionate in my tone, but some of that now he's
Yes.
adapted himself as well and has just accepted. I think one time I told him, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's only a 9 or something. And he was, I said, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's only a 2. And he said, my God, I thought it was at least a 9 or if not the 10. And so we had to adjust ourselves to
Right.
this,
Uh-huh.
that we related to one another based on our expectations of what came from our household. And that was another thing that we had to learn, not to allow our expectations to be bondage for us so that we
Mm.
could stop amplifying differences and appreciate one another. And that's when God began to really bless our relationship be more fruitful.
So here's what I'm hearing with the, I mean, we could do 4 shows on marriage, really.
Yes.
But here's what I'm hearing a determining factor in this whole piece. And this is why I love the ministry that you and your spouse had, because it was the G factor, the God factor. And so I'm going to say more about that. I want to do more of that on the end because I kind of want to work through some of the um, issues that we face
Yes.
in marriage, because you've mentioned communication, and that seems to be a big problem in marriages as it relates to couples and navigating the different things. So let's talk more about communication, if you can say more about that, because I'm going to
Okay.
come back to the God factor shortly.
Okay. On communication, it's very important for married couples to have a place to share their heart.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of us have not learned growing up how to share or even differentiate how we feel from what we think. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things we need to learn is to get in touch with and give each other the liberty without taking it personally or offensively to say, I really feel hurt by that comment. I really feel upset by that comment. And then express why, and someone would need to say, that was really hurtful because maybe somebody had a pattern of receiving negative reinforcement from their father, and so they have a little resentment reserve because that was something they truly did not like about their childhood. So now when they hear something that triggers the
Right.
similar or familiar
Mm-hmm.
feeling of that in the spouse, they take it out on the spouse, and that's called transferring. And that's an unfair battle because the issue that they had was with the parent, not with the
Oh.
spouse. But because
Mm-hmm.
it's so familiar, they transfer that feeling over to the person that's now becoming a victim of something they're not guilty of.
Well, how
But
do we
that's
work through that? What would you suggest that, because that's so common,
it is so common.
what would you suggest on for couples to begin to work on that piece in the communication process?
Okay, well, the first thing is they have to get comfortable just conversing with one another and allowing themselves to say how I feel. And that's going to feel awkward for some people because they never had to do that before. When I took my Restoring Your Heart group class, I realized that for the first time in my life, I had
Mm,
never been able to tell someone I am afraid. I was
okay.
never able to communicate that. And so if there's something in your upbringing, in my upbringing, children were to be seen and not heard.
Okay.
So I didn't have a voice. And so I didn't learn that I had a place to say, I really feel sad today, because there wasn't going to be an arm of embrace. It was like,
Right.
I think we need to just get that homework done, or, you need to get some chores done.
Yes.
And we
Yes.
have to give ourselves the place where we become naked and unashamed, where we can actually talk to each other and say, here's how I feel, here's why. And instead of somebody justifying, condemning, blaming, and even spiritualizing, going to the Word, well, you shouldn't feel that way. The Word says you should do that. Instead of condemning and bringing harm and hurt on that situation, it simply is allowing the person to speak and you to listen. It's speaking and listening without any other agenda than listening and not seeking agreement, but understanding.
Hey, Vicki, it's so interesting when you say that, because so many times with, and I'm going to segue into clergy couples, and I know I'm going to do another show with you. I know that, because there are layers of things that we want to unpack, because I believe in as I said, emotional and spiritual health for the church. And it can only happen at the church when the leaders are emotionally and spiritual healthy. So
Absolutely right.
I'm big on that, and you know that. But let's talk about ministry, and let's talk about what the church's role, because now we have people that are coming from homes and families, and
That's
they're
right.
coming into our sanctuaries every Sunday. And what are some of the things that we need to be doing as ministries to help families be stronger and help families be healthy? But the other piece of that, I know what we need to be doing. It needs to start at the top in terms of the pastor and the pastor spouses and families. Now, I've given you a whole lot. We only have 6 minutes and 53 seconds or so to
Okay.
go with this, but as best you can, because the last couple of minutes I do want to, talk about some other things. What should our role and what should our conversation be as it relates to that?
Well, I think that let's start with this piece. First of all, the Lord told me this. He said, how people say the marriages are under attack and the family is under attack.
Yes.
And the Lord said, that's our picket sign. That's the awareness. We have the awareness, and we understand that, because
Right.
the divorce rate is increasing. So we know that. And he said, then the next thing we typically do is we get our sword out. And that's great. The Word of God is strong counsel. Hebrews tells us that. We get
Right.
that strong out. The Lord rebuked you, Satan. And yes, that's true too. There's that piece of that. But then there's this third piece of really trying to help the soul to prosper. And I think that if we're going to move forward in this season of society, we really have to understand and help people to apply this piece. The soul is made up of three main parts: the mind, which does the thinking; the
Right.
will, of course, which does the choosing;
Yes.
and emotions, which do the feeling. And it's not that we're going to spend all of our time always ministering on this, but we do have to have workshops where we strengthen this area, where we
Yes.
build awareness in this area, where we give people tools. Like, we have surveys that give people tools, of a marriage foundation survey. And we give them a series of questions to ask. We start them off, and this is how we start them up with this survey. We compare their marriage to a garden, like the Garden of Eden, and we get them to go down this survey and honestly, answer these questions on this survey. It's brief. It only has like 5 questions. First, to find where they are. But once you have them find where they are, you can help them to begin to move forward from that place. And they submit the survey anonymously to you, and you go back and you tally up and find out, where are your couples? Are they rotting fruit? Are they, somewhat fruitful? Find out where the problem areas are. And then you build conversations and, lectures. You bring in other people who are counselors to really begin to get down to some of these root levels, because there are a lot of areas that compound one another. Bad finances will make poor communication even worse.
Right. Well, we're going to talk about that next week with the financial piece of that. But I want to, you've given some definitely tools as it relates to marriage, but also if you could, all the things you're saying, how can we begin to even get the leadership, i.e. pastors and spouses, to begin to see the need to even work on their own marriages. And I will say this, that I was reading a survey out of a magazine that talked about clergy marriages, and it was just saying that most of them are willing to get to the help, but it's the confidentiality, and many will drive
Yes.
500 miles so your people in your community won't know that really I'm in trouble and I can't get the help I need within my community. So let's address the need, because everything that you've talked about today mirrors, if not starts, in the clergy couple. So if you could take about a minute or so to do that, and then we'll give a final wrap up.
Focus on the Family has a great counseling referral service that's done by zip
Mm-hmm.
code, and they're very trustworthy in this area where it comes to marriage and family. And so for clergy, if there's, specific need, a private counselor is a good start, because in the intimacy of that room and environment, you have the safety and accountability to talk about whatever you need to talk about as a married couple.
Right.
And I recommend that would begin with you need to be in a place where you can just be you without the title.
Yes, exactly. Now,
Free enough to be you.
okay, now say this to me. If we could sum up, I mean, it's clearly you're going to come back and we're going to have more conversation about this, but if you could summarize, the title of this show is Marriage, It Hurts, But I'm in It. What would be a word that you would give as it relates to that? Just give me a word.
Okay, that's great.
Okay.
I would. Let's go back to the good mother's voice. Remember I said sometimes, the voice behind us may not always be good. Well, this is the good mother's voice. It's that voice that when you were growing up, your mother said, even if she didn't understand marriage as a covenant, but she said, honey, at the end of the day, you are in it and you are staying in this thing. Okay. And there's that voice has to stay behind us. I mean, it really does. And I was looking even at statistics on clergy and found that a lot of it was different by denomination. And there were denominations basically that said, if you're in clergy, you're not going to be able to use your gifts if you're divorced. And so some of that is that voice behind us that tells us, at the end of the day, this thing is a covenant.
Yes.
This is not like a contract that I don't like this anymore, and I don't like that, or that's pretty serious. I mean, inside of a marriage, you never really know all what people are going through, and that's why blanket counsel will not work for us as clergy, and that's why we have to work in these areas, because in the past we've given this blanket counsel, but there are so many complexities in dealing with marriage that becomes individual counsel, where we really do need to sit down with couples, sometimes in small groups and sometimes individually. But we'll get stuck if we're stuck in a place ourselves, and we will not be able to help the people get over an invincible hump. So,
okay, I mean, that's a great
we need to secure that voice that says this is a covenant, it's not a contract.
Okay, then, Vicki, thank you. We had a lot of challenges getting on air today. It's a great topic, but you know what? When I thought about it, with all the challenges we faced with being on air today, it reminded me of marriage, and that's what we do. We have challenges that are before us, and we have to be willing to work the process. I'm going to close with one of my favorite scriptures that says, God who began a good work in you will bring it to completion until the day of Jesus Christ. Thank you, Minister Vicki Keys, for being with us on Front Row Conversations. And thank you, Gail Sylvia and SylviaGlobal.com. God bless. Have a great week.
Thank you.